Yes, I will go ahead and handle that. I'll review the evacuation procedures so that we are prepared to be safe in the event of an emergency. If you hear the fire alarm, follow the instructions announced through the PA system. If asked to evacuate, use the glass door to exit outside and verbally alert others. We'll move to the main parking lot in front of the building or the AT&T parking lot at the McCullough-Brooklyn bridges. Our security team will be watching and will notify the appropriate emergency services. Lastly, we'll also have employees nearby who are trained to administer first aid if needed. Safety is a top priority, and while we hope the information is never needed, we want to ensure we are prepared. Additionally, we ask that you remain seated during the duration of the meeting, keeping the aisles clear, and do not block any exits. Will you please stand for an invocation? We thank you for the many blessings you have freely given to each of us. We ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the CPS Energy Board of Trustees. Please provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on the agenda today. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all the people well. We ask this in your name. Amen. Now, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Proceed to item number 3, which is public comment.
We have no registered public commenters.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to the consent agenda item. We have the approval of the prior minute meetings.
Move to approve minutes.
There's a motion by Dr. Mackey. Do I have a second? There's a second by Dr. Chair Romero. Ms. Ramirez, can you go ahead and?
Madam Chair, I've got some comments on this.
Sure.
All right, and I'm going to vote no on the minutes, but I thought I might provide an explanation. At our last Risk Management Committee meeting on November 12th, I compared the minutes of recent Operations Oversight, OOC, meetings with the minutes of this committee and found those of the OOC to be significantly more helpful to me in my role as trustee. Specifically, the OOC minutes, the preparation of which I'm told is overseen by Chief Customer Strategy Officer Deanna Hardwick, typically capture the substance of the meeting in appropriate detail by including questions posed by trustees and management responses. By contrast, the minutes of this committee, including the minutes before us today, while, and as Ms. Ramirez has correctly pointed out, they're legally sufficient, they might be described as skeletal. They duly note the positive assertions of management, but memorialize none of the questions and comments of trustees. Typically, after each presentation is summarized, the following sentence is repeated, quoting, "The Board of Trustees asked questions and discussed the presentation," close quote. Arguably, the minutes leave out the most important part of the meeting, so I'm renewing my request of the preparer of the minutes of our RMC meeting today to take his or her cue from Ms. Hardwick on minutes preparation. And by the way, I asked for this at our last RMC meeting, and well, I guess my request was ignored. And finally, I'd like my comments on this matter to be included in full in the minutes of today's meeting, and I respectfully ask our General Counsel, Shannon Ramirez, to do so. Thank you.
Thank you again for those comments. Definitely will take that into consideration, Mr. Steen. Can we go ahead and do roll call, please?
Yes, ma'am. Vice Chair Dr. Mackey? Yes. Trustee Steen? Chair Romero?
Yes.
Committee Chair Gonzalez?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, item number 5, which is a risk management update. But before Ms. Rangel speaks, I just kind of just wanted to open with these remarks. Again, good afternoon. Again, want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for your continued commitment to the important work of this committee. As we meet today, we're operating in a dynamic environment, nationally, statewide, and here in San Antonio with new leadership and evolving regulatory priorities. Our job is to ensure that CPS Energy remains resilient, forward-thinking, and grounded in the core values, reliability, affordability, and responsiveness to our community needs. We're not here to react, we're here to plan thoughtfully and adapt responsibly. Whether we're addressing AI-related load growth, updating our enterprise risk posture, or monitoring generation transitions, our focus today is aligning our strategies with both near-term and realities and long-term commitments. I encourage our trustees to be open to have some candid dialogue as we explore what these shifts mean for us for our work today and tomorrow. So thank you again, those of you who work with me to put together this agenda presentations. Let's begin with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you for your time and engagement today. Over the past several months, the risk management team has partnered with business units across the organization to conduct a thorough annual risk register refresh. The risks identified through the fiscal year 2026 refresh are reflective of both internal insights and broader industry dynamics. These risks will inform our integrated planning process, which consists of risk management, business planning, and budget planning. They will also support the development of our strategies, Vision 2030 and Horizon 2050. So I'll give you a summary of the results of the risk register refresh, and I'll also provide you the next steps of our risk management process. Our discussion today on the evolving risk landscape aligns closely with our strategic priorities and sets the tone for our topics today. So you'll hear from several presenters that will discuss trends that are expected to have a lasting impact on CPS Energy and in the utility industry, reinforcing the need for continued reliability and resiliency. In recent risk management committees meetings, I've noted that many of the risks previously discussed in various board forums remain relevant and persistent. And while some aspects of these risks have evolved, much of the risk landscape has remained consistent. We must continue to navigate a very complex and rapidly shifting environment. This slide shows topics and themes that have been in the news that are impacting the utility industry. And I'd like to highlight some of these themes that pose challenges and opportunities. What I would like to mention here is the broader implication of today's headlines is clear. The current trajectory of demand and growth driven by data centers, cryptocurrency mining, industrial electrification, population increases, and climate-related stress cannot be sustained by the existing infrastructure. The first call that I'd like to make mention of is partnerships. To address the widening gap between load growth and available dispatchable capacity, the utility industry must actively engage in strategic partnerships in collaboration with both vendors and customers. Partnerships can help on a variety of concerns. These articles mention improving demand. For example, Amazon Web Services and Google have already signed into demand response agreements in various states. The thought is by reducing their loads during high demand periods, they can help to prevent blackouts and reduce the need for additional fossil fuel generation. Another example that was cited is partnering with electric utility technology providers on developing an AI-type intelligent system that turns infrastructure into energy-aware digital ecosystems could help with energy efficiency. Now, these are things we must consider, but still the results remain to be seen. Another topic to highlight is around economics. Tariffs are a growing concern. So I want to turn our attention to renewable energy for a moment. Tariffs are and other economic factors could cause costs to go up. While renewable energy remains a priority in alignment with our CAP commitments and Vision 2027, we have to be aware that the U.S. International Trade Commission, or ITC, has finalized its decision to impose tariffs on imported solar panels from Southeast Asian countries, which could potentially increase solar by 30%. It could delay projects. It could also cause supply chain disruptions. And the last topic that I would like to mention is generation diversification, especially as we discuss and plan for growth in demand and clean energy. TVA, or Tennessee Valley Authority, just announced that it submitted a construction permit application to the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory commission for a small modular nuclear reactor. The CEO and president, or president and CEO, was quoted as saying that nuclear is very reliable, very resilient, and very clean, carbon-free. These are all topics that are in the industry. This is what CPS Energy team discusses as we go to conferences and trade show organizations, attend trade show organizations. These are all things that are out in public and that we discuss. And we need to consider these things as we plan for the future and keeping our commitments to our stakeholders and our community. And so what does that mean for the risk management process? Well, through the annual risk register refresh, we've conducted 2 steps of the identification of the risk management process, and that's the identification and assessment of these risks. So we took all the good information that we read about, that we hear about, and we walk the organization through these topics to update the risk register. This helps with the organization, the overall risk posture. It helps to build trust through transparent communication. But most importantly, we remain relevant. Our risks remain relevant and current. The last thing that I would mention here is that the next step is to conduct our mitigations or to develop our mitigations. By identifying the most appropriate risks, we can also develop holistic mitigation plans that really help to improve our efficiencies and operational performance. As part of the risk management process, we not only go to the organization to better understand our risks and document them, but we also want to make sure we have good alignment and collaboration. So we partner with the VPs so that we can look at the risk register holistically and get their feedback and perspective. More importantly, they can share perspective and feedback with each other. And then we can make adjustments as needed. Once we get alignment and feedback from the vice presidents, then we can move on to chief alignment and conduct the same type of discussion. After we receive feedback and get alignment from our chiefs, we can finalize the risk report, and then we can share with the risk management committee, which is where we are at today. But the most important part of this process is that we have an elaborate process that helps collaboration and alignment across all levels of the organization. And so what is the summary of our risk register refresh? Well, high and swan risks from fiscal year 25 to 26 increased by 18%, and the total number of risks from 25 to 26 increased by 3%. And while that's not a significant number, it does confirm that we did do our due diligence in reviewing the risks and updating them appropriately. And I would mention that this is really just a point in time. This is the one point in time in the year that the organization comes together to talk about risks at the same time. However, what I would say is that periodically we do reach out, risk management team does reach out to the organization to talk to organizations, multiple organizations even, to discuss emerging threats, to escalate them when appropriate. We also collaborate with external risk management professionals to gain insight. An example of this would be the LPPC audit and risk management working session that we held here at CPS Energy. So risk management and audit partnered, so Matt Mills and I partnered to hold and facilitate lead the LPP working session. It was a very well-attended session, and we got a lot of good insights from our peers that we were then able to share with the organization. And we do that throughout the year. Not hold the working session, but talk with our peers to bring forward the good risks that we need to think about. And then we investigate the risk trends and landscapes, which means we'll continue to do our research. And lastly, we partner with business areas to discuss interconnectedness of risks and holistic mitigation plans. But more specifically, we challenge the organization to think about how we can think about holistic mitigation planning so that we can be more effective. And the idea behind all of this is that we have a dynamic risk management process that we're working to really support the dynamic risk landscape. We also perform another kind of due diligence. We want to make sure that we're looking at risks the way that we should. And so we look for industry insights. We pull information from Deloitte and Protiviti and Gartner to help us make sure that we're looking at all the right risks in the right way. That's just another perspective that we like to really confirm that we're aligned appropriately. And what I can say is that in all these risk surveys that we're able to take a look at, we compared these to our risk register, and all the themes and risks that are on these surveys are reflected in our risk register. So again, that just gives us additional confidence. So for Horizon 2050, it's a 25-year outlook, so this is a little bit different. I talked about integrated planning and Vision 2030. We can use our enterprise risk register because that's a 12 to 18-month outlook to support integrated planning and Vision 2030. However, Horizon 2050 is a little bit different. So what we did was we took Horizon 2050's goals, reliability, value, financial strength, and team excellence, and we looked at a productivity survey that's a 10-year outlook on risks, and we mapped out the risks to the goals. And then we took it a step farther and said, okay, so what is the difference between these and the current risk register? And really, there's not a whole lot of difference. The themes are still similar. But that really supports a risk management, a message that I gave at a risk management committee a few times back. It might have been 2 risk management meetings ago, where I said that the risks that are present today are really not going to change. They're just going to intensify over time. And so that's what this analysis proves. So how we plan today will have an impact on the future. And no decision is riskless, but if we can actively identify the most appropriate risks and mitigate them proactively, then we can reduce our risks and possibly reduce our exposure. And that will help us remain agile, adaptive, and resilient. So what do we do after our risk register refresh? What are our next initiatives? As I mentioned, we're going to continue working on mitigation plans. We'll stay involved in integrated planning so we can make sure that we maintain our risk posture. We are going to make sure that we are involved in a Vision 2030 and Horizon 2050 strategy discussions so that we can capture the right risks and talk about risks appropriately. But we're also going to participate in all ad hoc operational special projects to further promote risk-based decision-making. This is really important. We've participated in a few over the last months. And what I've noticed is that when we provide the organization a platform to discuss risks, we are also giving them a chance to talk about their perspective on the risks that they have. And then we can prioritize the risks in the right way so that we can have a good decision and a good mitigation plan to move forward. Additionally, by participating in these kinds of initiatives, the risk management team delves a little deeper into industry insights and how the organization is moving and thinking so that they can better understand the organization and support the organization. And last but not least, we're going to continue to lead the Enterprise Resource Planning or Risk Management Program and the onboarding of management of the Independent Verification and Validation Vendor, Gartner. Now, Gartner's been with us for a couple of months, and they are fabulous, I have to say. They have hit the ground running. They are very effective in communicating the insights that they bring, and they're really helpful. Again, they've only been with us for a couple of months. What I would say is there's probably just not a lot of information to share at this point. But we are moving the project in the right direction as planned. And I know that there is plans to share information at risk subcommittee meetings. So that's a summary of the enterprise risk register refresh and a few of the ERMS items that we're working on. The remaining portion of the risk management committee will be discussing more about risk-informed planning. And so I kind of want to just recap and connect the dots a little bit. So in the beginning, I talked about the headline themes that were in the news, and I talked about the risk register and how we're thinking about those things and how we've documented and captured those risks. The next portion of the meeting, we'll talk about how CPS Energy is responding to these things and how we're looking at these risks and planning for them. So we have Ben Jordan, who will be talking about demand forecast, why we need to keep track and how we're going to do that. We have power generation. Benny Etheridge will be talking about our power generation strategy update and how we're responding to growth and what considerations we're making. And then macroeconomics, that's always going to be a factor as we move forward. So Corey Kaczynski is here to talk to us about economic environment and the financial impact. And then to really round out the presentations, Bill Cost is here from Marsh. Marsh is our insurance broker, so he's not here to sell us anything. He's really here to provide a service that we have with Marsh, and that's really to give us broader industry perspective. He's going to talk about the significance of AI on the grid and the different factors that we should consider. And if there's no other questions, or I can, okay.
Christine, go ahead.
I don't have to go first. Does anybody else want to say?
No, it's okay. That's fine.
So first, thanks, Ms. Ronhell, for your presentation today and the good efforts you're undertaking to de-risk CPS Energy. And I was wondering if we could put up, because I want to refer to our charter, if we could put up slide 3 of 5 of the minutes that we approved earlier.
Oh, no.
You don't have it? All right, well, I was going to show you the charter of this committee, and I wanted to focus on paragraph 2, which is entitled Authority. And it says, I'm quoting now, "The Risk Management Committee is authorized to consult with and review information from CPS Energy Management and other relevant sources to become familiar with and provide oversight and guidance concerning CPS Energy's enterprise risk and its risk management practices. The kinds of risks to be considered include, but are not limited to, financial risk, generation diversity, the existing and future regulatory climate, investment risk, and emerging utility risk." So again, there are 5 specific risks listed, but Ms. Ronhell, your presentation today seems to be predominantly focused on the 5th one, that is emerging utility risk. And I'm referring to your concentration on utility headlines, industry risk, and comparison and 10-year top risk outlook. And what I see missing in your presentation today and in past meetings is a keen focus on the 5 risks mentioned in our charter. And I'll have some remarks on the first risk mentioned, that is financial risk, when our CFO, Corey Gajinsky, makes his presentation later. But with you, I want to hone in on the 4th risk, and that's existing and future regulatory climate. With the change in administrations, this should be something you and executive management should be spending a great deal of time on. I'd expect it to be a major topic anytime we trustees meet as the Risk Management Committee. And to summarize, and this won't take long, in light of the change in administrations and growing skepticism about climate change ideology and the fact that the Paris Climate Accord's goals will not be met, it's a mistake not to revisit and re-examine our future plans. For example, let's take Spruce 1, which has 20 to 34 years remaining before its technical end of life. CPS Energy is financially stressed, has borrowed way too much, and 20% of our residential customers are in arrears and have been for years. And I feel like it's almost a dereliction of our responsibility as trustees not to be examining CPS Energy's plan by considering the extension of Spruce 1's life beyond 2028. And there's a threshold question whether ERCOT and federal regulators are going to sanction prematurely jettisoning 560 megawatts of generating capacity. By the same token, we should be discussing whether we should at least pause the conversion to gas of Spruce 2. It's undeniable that there's been a sea change in the regulatory environment. And finally, I respectfully ask you, Ms. Ronhell, do you have a response or any thoughts on my?
Actually, I'll take a note. As a chairwoman, I actually, not the chairwoman of the board, but I actually submitted a pretty intense memo to when we were going to put this agenda. First of all, we haven't gone through the entire agenda. I think those questions might have been and are included and sprinkled throughout here. And in my memo to the staff when we were designing this, we're not going to just do one session. We're going to do more than one. And so you know, Mr. Steen, as the current chair of this committee, I was pretty detailed about all the items that I wanted to cover and we should be covering through the duration of this year. One of them was extreme weather infrastructure hardening, carbon reduction, environmental policy risk. 4, community expectations and public trust. 5, innovation, governance, and emerging technologies. 6, operational and financial pressure, specifically risk number 45 and 16. 7, governance and policy continuity risk. Risk 2, risk 46, risk 12, risk 5. So, and there's just a good amount of financial volatility items that we're going to be covering throughout the year. Risk 6, 16, 45, regulatory policies, risk 4, 5, 18, and 83. So actually, I did submit a pretty thorough memo request when I looked at all the risks. There's a significant amount, as she stated earlier, it grew by 18%. I would hope that you would allow the process of meeting today and having further discussion, and then meeting throughout the year to definitely address some of your concerns. I don't think one meeting is fair to say that as the chair of this committee, we're not considering those risk factors. And so we just decided to handpick a couple of them. These items all tied to financials. And so by making good priority decisions, we can make then, take the headwinds and then make some other decisions. But we cannot in one meeting address every single point. We're gonna have more than one session. And then go ahead, Rudy.
I'm sorry, sir.
Go ahead, just. Yeah, so maybe I can share that memo with you, Mr. Steen, but it was pretty detailed.
Yes, RMC Chair Gonzalez is correct. We have a very comprehensive list of risks, and many of the items that you listed, including the 5 key that are in our charter, are part of that list. I did want to respond specifically to the questions regarding our generation plan and specifically plans around spruce. As you know, we periodically update our generation plan, and we are going to embark on a generation plan update this fall. As you will learn today, many of the assumptions that we made back in 2022 and 2023 have changed. The world has changed around us. I would like to share that relative to Spruce 2, it is our intent to continue to run Spruce 2 beyond, our conversion date of coal to gas. Spruce 1 has reached its, effective fully depreciated life. However, I did want to acknowledge you are correct. The federal administration is using Section 202C of the Federal Power Act in order to initiate reliability must-run constructs in other parts of the country. There have been 3 such that have been noted in the last 3 weeks in other parts of the country. ERCOT maintains that responsibility relative to RMR contracts as we've experienced here with our Bronick units. So just wanted to state that, part of our Vision 2050 is a continued affirmation and focus on ensuring that we are first and foremost reliable, affordable, and that we're transitioning to cleaner energy. And we're guided by our CAP principles in order to guide that long-term path. And so we are going to continue to transition our fleet and ensure that we're meeting our rapidly growing community in the most affordable way while continuing to transition to cleaner and cleaner forms of energy. So just wanted to share that perspective.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't want to get ahead because we have a pretty robust agenda. So I want to thank Mr. Steen always for his thoughtful commentary. Make sure that we submit his full comments, but I want to go ahead and continue to move the meeting forward. And just again, just anticipating, one of my follow-up actions was specifically to address Mr. Steen's concern, and that was, again, what are the external policy integrations? I was going to propose a quarterly check-in to track alignment of CPS Energy strategy with evolving ERCOT, PUC, and federal and local guidance. And so, again, we're jumping ahead. I think that many trustees probably had some really thoughtful statements that we're going to make or questions. But again, thank Mr. Steen for his comments. And I want to go ahead and keep moving forward with the agenda because there's a lot we have to cover. So thank you for answering those questions, both of you. If we can move to the next item, please.
Thank you.
Again, if we could just allow the presentations from all colleagues, and then as a chair, will open up any Q&A, any comments, and then if we're going to have long statements, I think it's fair, but let's not make any assumptions. Let's go ahead and allow all trustees to ask questions, and then I'm going to rotate and just make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak. Thank you. Please go ahead and proceed with your presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'll be discussing today managing the demand forecast and large energy requests, and this is all in the spirit of risk management and how we're going to ingest large customers' requests. You guys have heard us talk about the amount of requests we're receiving from large customers, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're including that into our forecast and what we're doing to help ingest this kind of a customer that is complicated and is asking for a lot of energy. I think I just said that. So we'll jump into the forecast, the demand forecast. So here we're sharing just a level of detail that shows incremental increases and in what we're doing about it. So in the blue line, you can see the 2026 forecast that was there, and the 2027 in orange. And then we run sensitivity cases for load forecasts, and it's a complicated algorithm that uses residential, small commercial, large commercial, and then our large energy block requests that we've been received. And this is what we've put together. And in the blue box, you can see that from 2026 to 2030, our 5-year average is how we look at incremental growth. In the past, recent past, it's been about 160 megawatts that we've been seeing. We've been seeing that creep up to the 190, and now we're kind of rounding that up for discussion purposes today for around 200 megawatts on a 5-year average for annual growth. Wanted to point out here on this graph in particular, you can see that there's an inflection point at 2031. We are paying attention to our build-out plan on the transmission side for some of the larger energy requests, and you can see that forecast creeping out into the 5 to 7 year range where we start to see that. This is I just wanted to really put this one home, that this is an iterative process that we'll continue to review on an annual basis. What are we seeing? Right, there's a lot of, you guys have you've seen the headlines, you've seen the amount of energy requests that all utilities are getting across the nation, quite frankly, the world. We're no different. And so what we've seen is, I believe we've mentioned that we have about 2 gigawatts of requests in the queue that we're analyzing right now and solving for. And that's how we know that inflection point of the 5 to 7 year range where we start to see transmission build out, where capacity starts to open up. In the feasibility phase, those are the requests that we've received to study. So just to kind of sum it up a little bit, the ones that are in the agreement phase have bought property, they've shown building plans, they've gone through some checks and balances to get into a more real customer, right? And I'll get into the later discussion here on kind of the ERCOT, Senate Bill 6 things that are happening to kind of really create that visibility for real load that's coming to us. We're no different, and so we're making adjustments internally to make sure that we're ingesting this customer with risk in mind and with real energy request. And so you can see the requests they get astronomical, right? You got feasibility, which is we've received some level of detail on their load ramp infrastructure and a general plan, and that's about 8.8 gigawatts, right? And then in the intake phase, which will be a little bit more speculative phase, kind of interest that we're just receiving, we've got a process where we intake those requests. We put those in the queue, it's like 9.5 gigawatts. So just to kind of dial all that back down to what's real, 33%, you guys are familiar with our system peak being around 6 gigawatts. So we've got 33% of the requests in the queue that we're solving for currently. So our current state, I kind of touched on this. One of the things we did was look in our internal processes, and this level of customers' request is a little bit different than your normal large commercial, small commercial, residential request. And so we've been nimble to make sure that we're ingesting the customers appropriately, thinking about the future and looking at how we improve our processes and understanding our peers, best practices, and a tremendous amount of attention to that and how we get better for future state. One of the things we've done as an organization is we initially started and we created a large customer intake team to really get in front of that customer, understand that business, and make sure we understood how they act and what they're doing and understand that business so we could bring them on and understand it and be nimble as a utility. One of the things we've recently done is created an integrated system planning team that really brings that large customer intake piece closer to the generation forecasting team, which is the energy portfolio analytics team that helps to generate the forecast that I showed on the first slide. And then we developed a roadmap that we've got process improvements in place that I'll touch on short-term, long-term, short-term, midterm, and long-term, and what we're looking at and paying attention to as far as being nimble for ingesting these kind of customers. I believe coming up in June, government relations is going to have a more robust presentation on the Senate Bill 6, and they'll be giving some more detailed information on that. But in general, Senate Bill 6 has reliability implications and creating that load forecast detail that makes things more real, because you have all heard in the past that some of the load forecast is fictitious or duplicative in nature, because you may have multiple requests that might be the same, so you have an inflated and overinflated request is what we're seeing a little bit of. I kind of touched on this as well, but we've developed some processes, a roadmap, and we've got a standardized, integrated, aligned to end-to-end process. Tremendous amount of communication internally to align this, and we've actually executed on I'll touch on the external process map that we've actually put in place externally on our website that is actually live here. So some of the improvements we've done is we've aligned internally. We've documented the processes. We've defined a large load threshold for us. CPS Energy as 40 megawatts and above. Kind of gets you into a substation build-out percent there. And then ERCOT has other implications for 75 megawatts that's embedded into the process. We've also created some dashboards to create visibility that I kind of flashed up there. We have additional dashboards that show additional details for our internal folks internally to help with from agreement perspective to status and how the customers are progressing through the process. Some of the short-term things that we've actually executed this past Wednesday, the website, the external facing customer website was updated. That's been out there since last Wednesday. And then the longer-term things we're looking at is to continue to standardize our processes, customer offerings, looking into tariffs, and then, of course, making sure that we're keeping an eye on how we're going to integrate this into the long-term future ERP process. Just kind of flashed up a couple of slides here on the external website that's available. And the website link is on one of the upcoming slides, but really a simple process is what we tried to get into. Talks about how you're going to do business with CPS Energy, what we're paying attention to, and then it gets into some nitty-gritty 6-step process that we already have some feedback from customers on. Just really wording things and clarifying on some wording, but nothing major. The good feedback from the customers on that right now. So Deanna and team, thank you for helping us get that feedback from our customers. And like I said, the website's there available if you'd like to check that out in real time. A lot of work goes into paying attention to making sure that this is appropriate in how it is also interpreted on your mobile phone, just something I learned along the way. And then there's also a lot of good things that to pay attention to make sure the community has access to this. So with that, one of the things we're looking at is just a balanced approach, right? I mentioned this is an iterative process. We're going to continue to iterate and make sure that we're getting all the real-time information we can, develop some plans, and then start to serve our customers and make sure that we're implementing that into our forecast that is as tight as it can be with consideration for longer-term implications. Questions?
Open it up for any. Go ahead, Dr. Moore.
Thank you for this. Appreciate it.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you a pretty abstract question.
Okay.
So we're talking about these large load connections and demand in risk management. So could you talk a little bit more about what is the actual risk in this particular area? Because I'm thinking, there's lots of things it could be. It could be that we can't solve for it, right? That we can't meet the demand. It can be that we can't meet the demand quickly enough, and these people go to another city. It could be that we oversolve, although SB 6 should take care of that. It could be that we don't comply with the law in solving for it. That would be a terrible one. Or that we solve for it at a cost to our own generation plan. So what exactly is the risk of all this?
Actually, I was going to ask that. And then I guess to build upon the chair's question, mine was specifically like, how are we distinguishing between speculatory load growth and then long-term, the infrastructure support demand within ERCOT and it's updating its framework, because there's like, we're assuming, and then here's reality. So how are we anticipating speculatory growth versus, I'm sorry, let me go back to my notes. Between speculatory low growth and long-term, how is our infrastructure supported demand with ERCOT updated? Like, how are we distinguishing the both?
Yeah,
like she stated, we don't want to overbuild and then not be meeting the mandate.
Yeah, great question. I think they both kind of, I'll maybe one answer it, if that's okay. And if I don't, please, I'll reiterate. So, what we're really focused on is the reliability. So our initial plan is it's all integrated together, right? And so we've got the generation retirements that are in plan that impact the build out along with the energy requests that we're seeing. And so that's why we developed the process to really make sure that we understood when a customer was real, when they were speculative, and us giving them the answers to make the business decisions that they needed to make. In the forecast, it does include normal load growth along with block load customers, right? So it's a stacked approach with everything from residential to large customer intake in that plan. And we harmonize that, run it through the algorithms, and make sure that that forecast is sound. How do we make sure we don't overbuild is by the iterative process that we're going to go through. These are multi-year projects that we're talking about. We have a base load of significant investment to make. Now, in particular, with the large load customers, we have the luxury of actually having some in our service territory. And part of the analytics that we do is we use that data to look at how they've been bringing on load, and we use that in our forecast. Now, what we want to make sure that we're paying attention to, and the reason why the importance of iterative processes is because the customers are saying we're going to use a lot more energy than we have before. We want to see it. So right now, we do have the luxury that we have executed on agreements, which is another gate that they cross through to kind of make sure that they're real. And in the agreement process that we work with our legal team, we're reducing the risk to CPS Energy there. So if there is an amount of energy that they request that we build to that they don't use, there is a way for us to recover cost in the agreement process. So that's one of the ways that kind of in the tactical ways that we are mitigating cost and financial risk to us for build-out plans. And that is a full cost recovery there.
Let's go to slide 4 real quick.
About
Yeah, I think what the board is going to see, I don't think there's one answer to this risk. You're going to see us sprinkle the impact of large loads throughout our presentations as we go forward because it impacts everything. It impacts, I'll just tell you, unless the board has a different opinion, I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about large loads going to other service areas because we have so many at our doorstep. We're going to get our fair share. We're one of the hottest data center markets in the country right now, large loads in general, but data centers in particular. So we're going to have more large load, than we can say grace over. But this slide really tells a story, and ERCOT's slide would look almost identical. We have to have our process right, so that the customers are making the commitments we need them to make, so that we don't overbuild infrastructure, so that we have a handle on the planning that it's going to take on the generation side of the business. That's really where the pressure is going to be, from a rate standpoint. How do we plan? Our current generation plan doesn't include large load at all. So the update we're going to do this year that speaks to some of Trustees' comments earlier is going to be to update our generation plan with all those new variables, and changes in mind, including the regulatory questions that are being asked about, how much control we'll have to make some of these decisions on our own, or whether or not, policy out of DC or Austin is going to change that. So I would say that this risk is going to be sprinkled out through the conversation, but if our process is right, it will help our existing customers. It'll help us protect our existing customers from having to overinvest for the large load customers. And that's really what our process is set out to try to accomplish, is to make sure they're paying their fair share while we plan for the total appropriately.
There's a follow-up question by Chair Romero.
Yes, ma'am.
I think we have a little more work to do on this question. Because again, I do think SB 6 is going to take care of a lot of the overinvestment piece, but I do think there's a bigger question here that isn't being answered, and I hear it in the community. I hear it from people saying, so what if we can't serve these people? And there's an answer to that. I know there's an answer to that, but I'm not saying we need to slow down because we can't, but I just think a global answer to this question of what is the risk of this new demand that we have. And I think, that question of meeting this demand and the generation plan, we're going to see how those impact one another. And we're going to have to think about that when we get to that.
Yes, ma'am.
That is my challenge on that, but I have a different question.
Okay.
So can we go to the dashboard? The 6 steps. Okay, so can you explain to me So step one is where people come in and you do the study and tell them if you can meet their demand, when you can meet their demand. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's the one where you're kind of taking requests in tranches, right? So either you get on the train or you're not on the train. And if you're on the train, you get your answer back in a few months.
Correct.
Okay. Now, because I've heard people asking about this with some of the large load people saying, could we just pay for some outside company or consultant to do the initial feasibility study? Is that allowed?
So right now, our process is that we're currently tackling that internally. I believe it was around 3 or 4 board meetings ago, you guys approved additional consulting support for engineering planning, transmission planning folks. So we brought on 3 additional resources to help us build that model out. I believe that's a model that we can consider moving forward is, hey, what does the opportunity look like for something to take external money for a study? But essentially, we've set up that process really from internally, but thinking about that as an option in the future, we can definitely think about that.
Okay, because, that is what I'm hearing from some of them, is that it's not that we're upset because you're telling us it won't be for whatever, 8 years. It's that you're not telling us anything, and we don't know. And then is there any way that this will evolve so that people can see where they are in the dashboard?
Yeah, that's a good point. And we've been thinking about what that looks like internally. We do have a list of folks that we're evaluating and how they come in. And the checkpoint that they get through is once they submit to us some information that is enough information that meets the criteria for us to take back to engineering, and the criteria, that moves them into feasibility phase.
But Ben, they know where their project is in the process. In other words, once they've signed a contract, they know if ERCOT has approved their transmission line. They know, if we started the routing and siting process. They know the elements related to their project and where it is in the process.
Correct. Yeah, right now we're communicating individual customers where they are in their particular process because each customer is different. If you in theory put a list out there, somebody may get, like, the list goes out of order depending on what needs to be built to serve the amount of energy they've requested.
But I'm saying even before the contract. I mean, they're not signing a contract before the feasibility study's done.
Right.
So what if they want to know where they are in the feasibility phase?
We can look at that. We haven't
All those gates, I mean, I think the term is gates, they just need a gate to.
The problem is they're not actually a project till they've signed a contract. Everything up to that point is all speculative. Even the work we've got to do.
Which is the question I'm asking, right? How do we distinguish? And again, this is a process. It's still talk until there's an actual contract, and that makes sense. I mean, so usually the way it works, public sector, as a private company, I'm footing, my consultants are developing a plan, hopefully taking into consideration your requirements. But I fork that money out, and then once we're ready to go there, I can see then CPS taking those initial steps. And yes, we can provide dashboards all day long, but I don't think we should be taking any action until there's a signed contract. I mean, that would be my position. I mean, why should we, again, that's regulatory. We're gonna build in San Antonio. We shouldn't be building just because we think they're gonna do it and they've gotta go through their own process for incentives. We should be accommodating them at the point of an actual commitment to us. That would be, at least my initial thought on that.
Well, I think I'm saying, and I agree with all that. I'm saying something a little bit different. I mean, to say to people who are waiting for an answer, putting in this investment, to say, well, you don't have a project until you get a contract. And they're saying, give us a contract. We're stuck in phase 1. Give us a contract. That's what they want to know.
Yeah, but
why are we still in stage 1? Okay. Why can't we go out and do the feasibility study, pay for it ourselves, maybe just speed up your decision a little bit?
Okay. Thank you for reiterating that. I think I understand the question a little bit better.
Can you restate that, Dr. Romero? I just want to make sure I understood your comment correctly.
Okay.
That when Rudy said it's not a project until there's a contract, but it's taking a while to get to that stage, and people are saying, we want to have a contract. You haven't sent us a contract. It's not that they're trying to play around and shop cities. It's that they're stuck in stage 1, and they want to know why, and they want to know if they can pay to have somebody do the feasibility study, and then you make the
Right.
decision.
So I'll go back just a little bit. So when we initially started, and I talked about identifying all the reliability projects that we needed for stability that met the retirements of generation, proliferation of renewables, things of that nature, there was a project set that was developed. That was a major study that we had to do about a year ago. We've completed that, and now we're going through the next phase of study. So we've got a cadence of study process that we're going through. And so we've recently communicated that, Dr. Romero, to that next group of folks that are in this study phase. So they're aware, or going to be aware within the next couple of weeks or week or so, that their project is in the study phase and it has begun. And so that was what we heard from the customers was, hey, where are you at in this study? So we've mitigated that. We brought on the additional resources. And then just thinking about it from an engineering perspective, bringing on another, or allowing a customer to pay for that resource is where we're headed. There will be some charges for studies in the future that will further help to make sure that we understand a customer is serious about the development here in the service territory. I don't want to get too grindy with engineering.
I understand that is the issue. It's, we tell them what we have available today, and that we've got to put them in the queue to get through the next study process to meet on what the timeframe is going to be to their full load requirements. And they're hesitant to sign a contract, for good reason, because they don't know if that timeframe is going to meet their business needs. So we are actively trying to figure out how do we tighten that timeframe up so that we can get them to the point where they're willing to sign the contract sooner rather than later. I think that when I came back, and asked that question over the last couple of customer meetings that I've had, the issue is, Rudy, the information they're going to rely on is the same information that we have to go to ERCOT to work, with them on their process. So how do we effectuate a quicker timeline by allowing them to pay for their own study? I don't know how that we accomplish that yet, but that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
No, I just want to ask Dr. Romero, you were talking about using external factors instead of internal. Okay, and I understand that, Mr. Garza, in order to speed that process, why can't we utilize that process in external?
It just has to do with the inputs that any engineering company will use to get to an answer. And, whether or not somebody paying for their own study will allow us to get to that point quicker or not. That's the issue. It's the inputs that an engineering company would need.
I think this is a really good topic, but then I would say, well, what about our other customers? Why are we going to add risk? Again, every time you allow a third party to do something, a feasibility study could go in their favor. It may not be in our best interest. So I'm not saying that we can expedite the gates and provide transparency and get them there faster, but with every decision that we made to add a large load, that's another decision that impacts what we do for those who want to build homes. That impacts the small business or large other business, and it also impacts the demand of a customer. And we have more than one customer. We can't just make exceptions for our bigger customers just because they want to get in front of the line faster. I mean, again, I go back to the modeling. What is real capacity we need to meet today? What is this potential capacity going to add to what we still need to meet? And I think these are great conversations that are not going to be answered today. But what I'm hearing today, though, at least from all colleagues, there's an interest to support the expediting of that, and there's ways where private sector can do that, and that's great. But I still kind of go back to what do we need to build today just to sustain what we have? And so I think if we can continue this conversation, because we're barely on presentation 2, and data centers are hugging it, and the majority of it's going to be focused on that. But I kind of go back to we have responsibility to all users, not just data loads.
I just want to make it clear. The resources that we use to meet, the normal growth of commercial, industrial, residential is different from, that's why we set Ben's group up. Yeah, we got 2 different groups, so. No, I understand, but the large loads don't slow down the organic growth. Yeah, I just want to make that clear, yeah.
It's still a cost. You still have to pay for it.
And I just want to add that I just want to be clear that whatever it is that we do is not to speed us up to yes. It might be to speed us up to no, or it might be to speed us up to saying, you're going to be waiting 13 years. these outside companies would have to use the same standards that we do. It would just increase our bandwidth a little bit. So I'm not saying we speed this up. We just give them more surety sooner. And it may be no, and I get that, yeah.
Understood. Great conversation. Next, any other questions, Mr. Steen? Dr. Mackey, any statements? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next item.
Thank you.
They may have to put it up back there. Good afternoon, trustees. We put together a brief presentation for you. It's a risk update, really, on our gen plan. Just looking forward, the challenges that we face in trying to deliver a reliable, affordable generation to serve our community in an environmentally responsible manner. I'll talk just a little bit about the ERCOT market, go back over our original Vision 2027 gen plan, path forward, and the risk management activities we're undertaking today. I believe you've seen this chart before. This is from ERCOT and their CDR. Talks about reserve margins for the summer and winter seasons, and you'll notice that over time that those are shrinking significantly. That means we're going to experience more volatility in our markets. That's a risk we have to manage. Tells us we need to add generation, which, as you know, we've been actively working to do. As you just heard Ben indicate, we're seeing growth of about 200 megawatts a year. I think you'll recall this slide from 2022. In January 23, this program was approved. Net is we added about 5,700 megawatts of generation. We dropped out about 3,000, gave us a net change of 2,700 megawatts. Retiring or converting our coal units, retiring aging gas units, and adding additional solar, wind, and gas. So this is our scorecard, high level, give you a sense of where we're at today on this plan. We've made good progress. We're better than half done on our path to 2030 here in 2025. As you can see up there, the gray indicates what we've actually got online today, and the green is where the purchases have been contracted and they're in flight. And finally, orange, we're still negotiating those agreements. Blue is what we still have left to do, and of course, those retirements that we've talked about previously are shown there as well, and natural gas. Net is we started around 6,400 megawatts, and we're aiming for 10,000 megawatts in 2030. As we think about our path forward, we've got to add new plan generation consistent with our objectives. We've got to leverage renewable generation and storage to reduce our emissions to achieve our cap goal. And then finally, we've got to tap new and emerging technology that can help us improve our generation mix to reduce our emissions. We've seen geothermal, we've seen small modular nuclear reactors, we've seen microreactors, we're seeing fuel cells, we're seeing alternates to battery storage that are all coming into the market and developing. And we're studying those, working closely with Elena's team and others. We're spending time with these vendors to learn more. Bottom line is we're evaluating all options that are available to us, including the life extension of our existing units, Mr. Steen, to your question, that will allow us to continue our pursuit of our cap goals. These are some actions we're taking today to manage risk. As indicated there, we want to buy, build, contract for new generation to meet our needs, basically add more generation as planned. We want to blend in dispatchable and renewable generation to support our quest to achieve our 2050 cap goal while still maintaining reliable, affordable generation to meet the community's needs. We'll continue to invest in our existing units, including evaluating those life extension options. If they make sense, obviously it's something we'll be coming back and talking with you all about. We want to leverage our industry expertise and partnerships, Southwest Research here locally and others, EPRI, to support emerging technology development. If there's a better, faster, cheaper way to produce electricity for our community, we want to take a leadership role in that. And finally, we have to maintain focus on our financial performance. We've got to have that balance sheet to support our efforts. So, in closing, I guess I would say that all options are on the table for us to deliver reliable, affordable generation in a responsibly, in an environmentally responsible manner, to meet the community's needs. And that's our focus.
Any trustee have questions? Not, I like to.
I would like to ask Mr. Garza, thank you for, it was delayed, but you did respond to my concern about the regulatory climate. And when do you think that you'll have a handle on that? Where are you in sort of the process of understanding what all this means to us?
Yeah, we'll be having a presentation at the June board meeting where Kathy Garcia will talk about what happened up in Austin, and we'll layer in some of what's going on up in DC. So we've got a handle on what's going on everywhere that we're active. And those policy decisions or drivers will inform the work that's ahead of us. To refresh our generation plan. So you'll get more information at the June board meeting, and then we've got work ahead of us this year to update our generation plan.
And what's your timetable on updating the generation plan again?
Yeah, I mean, that was always in talking to the chair, that was our goal, is to have that work, get through that work by the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Steen. I do have a question, Benny. On slide 37, I think it is, the demand outlook for summer winter reserve margin update.
Yes, ma'am.
So obviously with ERCOT, their continued focus on reliability, our capacity planning efforts, are they advancing at the pace that supports systems needs and stakeholder expectations, is my question. I think one of the challenges, and I remember even when Paula was here, I used to tell her, as a board members, we don't have like a project, like I'm used to having a program portfolio app and it tells me all the projects that are in the pipeline. We don't have privy to that. So that's why I'm asking that question. I mean, are we, our planning efforts advancing at the pace that the support system needs and meets stakeholder expectations for that?
Yes, ma'am, I believe we are. When you look at the activities we've got underway today, we're staying ahead of the curve and we're continuing to do things in the market that will allow us to do that.
I think there are two answers to that question.
Yeah, that's too high level for me.
We are, I think the work that we've done to try to stay ahead of the growth in San Antonio, I think is probably ahead of where the state is. I think there are plenty of projects in the queue to add solar, to add batteries.
Because that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, on the gas side, probably not as much gas development as I think Pablo at ERCOT would tell you they'd like to see. And again, a lot of those projects, some of them will show up and some of them won't.
Yeah,
they get into the queue, but they don't ever get built. So I don't know how I don't know how as a state we're going to meet the scale of load that is being projected by 2030.
So that was, if you don't mind, that was going to be my follow-up question to Benny, which was slide 29. I'm going to make sure, 39, excuse me, which was, are we taking full advantage of any new opportunities at the state or federal level to accelerate project development or remove any implementation of barriers using solar storage, natural gas to meet the demand? You kind of answered that already, kind of. So, I mean, I think that we speak in generalities, and I can understand some of this information is sensitive. They may require executive sessions, but it's not quite clear. I mean, he stated that we're ahead of ERCOT, which is good, but then determining which are the right projects. They may not be funded, cost recoverable funding, may not have state grant funding or federal funding. And so, again, the right partnership, this is where public-private partnerships come into play. If we can get more of those. Do we have like an RFI process right now, maybe to anticipate some of these potential projects where there's gaps and there might be an opportunity for RFI?
So we do, and let me let Elena talk just a little bit about that.
First, thank you for the question, and I think Rudy hit on it spot on. Right now, and you'll hear from Marsh here in just a little bit, but right now we're seeing new gas development, for example. It's in order to site and commission new gas, it's getting near a 5-year mark. In some areas, it's getting closer to 6 and 7. So we're just seeing a lot of supply chain constraints globally as large load. It's not just data centers. It's actually large load of all kinds, industrial growth, reshoring, and even here in San Antonio, we've got a lot of expansions going on. The speed at which the demand is showing up outpaces the supply chain's ability to build supply in time. And so there's lots of really great articles and information out there, but we are in a supply chain constrained environment. For us here at CPS Energy, we've got everything on the table. So we certainly have work underway relative to we've added over 500 megawatts of solar, over 500 megawatts of storage. As you all recall, we added 200 megawatts plus a 2% adder for nuclear. We also added 1,710 megawatts of gas that we acquired. We're going to continually be in the market to look at opportunities to build and to buy. And we are going to present opportunities to this body and our regulators for opportunities that can overall reduce our costs. Because in addition, as you all know, anytime there is a supply chain constrained environment, not only do you see timelines expand, which we're seeing in gas build, but you're also seeing costs. The cost escalation for new build of natural gas has more than doubled in the last 3 years. And so, we're looking for opportunities out in the market to further, achieve our Gen Plan objectives, keep our reserve margin long so that we can protect our customers from high prices during the supply constraint environment. So happy to answer any questions about where we are, but we do have a combination of build, acquire, and we're looking at partnerships as well.
Yeah, we've got another 600 megawatts-ish of solar to go, another 500 megawatts of battery storage. So we're in the market every day looking for PPAs that fall within, what we think is affordable for our customers. That's why we're kind of taking it a bite at a time, because we're getting the best deal, we're signing the contract. We're not, if we wanted to go out and get all 500 megawatts at one time, we're probably going to play a little bit of a premium right now. So we have to just continue to tick away at it. Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Romero? Chair Romero?
Thank you. I had a few questions for Benny, actually, and it's on this slide. I just want to clarify for everybody, because I have to do the math myself. So when we're looking at the natural gas target, it's just a little bit confusing, but it shows that if you achieve the gray, which we have, and the blue, which we will, then that will cover the black loss.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because it almost makes it seem like, if we do those two things, we're still that much short, but we're not. Okay. Can you remind us of what the Gen Plan said about nuclear? Because I didn't think we had the STP expansion in mind, so it seems like that puts us ahead of the curve even.
It does, and that was an opportunistic thing for us to do. It came up at a time when we were transitioning a partner on the site, and we took advantage of that opportunity to get zero emission energy to better support our cap target.
Okay, thanks. It's just, all of a sudden, everybody's discovering nuclear, but we discovered nuclear before that, even. And then I just wanted to ask you, is the movement in battery storage faster even than you thought it could have been when we approved the Gen Plan?
It's been very fast. We've seen it pick up significantly, and we're also seeing a lot of research in alternatives to battery storage. So that space is growing very quickly, and we're moving to take advantage of it. As Rudy indicated, we've still got another 500 megawatts to go, but we're watching prices out there right now, and with supply chain constraints, we're ahead of the curve as far as delivering for our community, so we're pacing ourselves, trying to time the market, if you will.
So, but just pushing you a little bit more.
Sure.
The 2023 you probably would not have ever predicted where we are now.
No, ma'am, I would not.
Okay,
And that's the beauty of this market, and that's why we have to be vigilant and engaging with industry partners and talking, listening to other people. That's why we've got a strategy team now, and Elaine and her team are helping us out. We're having to go places we've never been before.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know about that. I thought our plan was pretty ahead of it. I think part of what the former or outgoing mayor, I mean, I think the team, the RAC, everybody, I think did a pretty good job of forecasting the future. I don't know if that's a true statement that we didn't know we would be here today. I mean, we're discussing hydrogen solutions 2 years ago. So I think this organization is very future forward. I think that the conversation no one really wants to have is how do we pay for it, which are the reality is we could have future forward vision of where we need, what we need to buy, where we need to position ourselves. But the reality is that the majority of citizens in San Antonio can't afford the future. So that's always going to be the balance. It's not us being ahead of the curve, but how do we pay for it all? Any other questions by trustees or Rudy? Anybody? Okay, we'll move on to the next item.
Thank you. Corey?
All right, well, good afternoon. All right, so for today's presentation, we really just want to take this opportunity within the context of this risk management committee to give an overview of the macro environment that we see today, and really give some insight actually to the work we do behind the scenes relative to understanding what's going on across the globe, across the country, and locally, and ultimately kind of translate that to why that's important and how that intersects with elements of our strategy, how that drives decision-making, how that can even drive us pivoting some of our decision-making as we continue to stay plugged in. I will note, while I am up here presenting, there's a team within financial services that does a lot of this monitoring and partnering internally with our forecasting group. We also have a team of financial advisors that also assist us in giving this information and helping us process it from a decision-making process. So with that as some context as to why we're here, I'll kind of go into the agenda, which is a little bit of an overview of what we see, a little bit of discussion of kind of what we see from a risk perspective on the horizon relative to the macroeconomic landscape and kind of what that means for us. So, while I think it's pretty obvious, why we monitor economic conditions, it is quite beneficial to us. Specifically, it helps us identify elements to our financial plan that could be at risk. It could help us identify any risks to our outlook. It does help us inform at a broad level our vision through 2050 and kind of what the expectations are. So much like, a meteorologist monitors the weather, we are monitoring kind of the economic weather through this kind of skill set. And kind of the other element is really helping us understand our customers. And this is in part a little bit of a partnership with Deanna's area, but understanding those environments and how that translates to both our residential and our commercial customers is helpful to understand kind of what they may be going through. And ultimately, that helps inform within our financial services team our strategy to access the financial markets when we need to go out and borrow money, how much liquidity we want to maintain on hand, and ultimately allow us to have a balance sheet that allows us to be flexible, allows us to absorb any unforeseen risks, and also allows us to do our day-to-day job. And that's the end goal of what we try to enable through our financial positioning. Obviously, there's a lot of economic data we look at. It's not just kind of the indicators that you hear day in and day out, either locally or at a national level, but really looking at fiscal policy and monetary policy is a really big deal. And I think many of us are more familiar with monetary policy. The Federal Reserve gets a lot of headlines, interest rates get a lot of headlines, and those are obviously the key for us. But fiscal policy obviously has a lot of impact that directly ties back to our customers and their final bills here in San Antonio. And whether it be, fiscal stimulus that we saw during COVID that had its own set of kind of economic impacts that ultimately impacted us here in San Antonio, or whether it be the current conversation that's going on right now in Washington relative to the budget bill that's floating around the Senate right now, all of those decisions will have impact. And I think what folks, I think would, again, in this context of the risk management meeting, would be interested in realizing that how much the federal government borrows impacts how much credit is left for other entities like us and how that impacts our interest rate. So monitoring what size of the investor community treasuries are going to take up helps us understand what's left of the market to invest in CPS Energy. So anyways, super interesting things, but that's what our team does kind of behind the scenes often. Just for the sake of showing a little bit of detail for this committee are some of the indicators that we track. And at the time of print, April data and May for some of these is all we had. From an indicator perspective, I would argue everything's kind of moderate to high moderate risk. It's been an incredibly volatile first half of this year for a variety of reasons. You've got indicators that some of us have heard of and maybe not as familiar with. But in totality, I think, the big one for us at CPS Energy are the various metrics or indicators around inflation. We've seen how that can impact the broader economy and how that impacts our customers' share of wallet to, pay their various bills. We care about as an entity from our supply perspective, our capital and O&M budgets, and we also care how it impacts our customers as it pertains to their ability and their share of wallet that they have to pay bills to us. So of all of those are probably front and center for a lot of us here at CPS Energy. But all the other ones are all indicators that are relevant, whether it be GDP, which had an interesting kind of math event over the first quarter, and whether it be employment. While it's positive, you've seen kind of a downward trend month over month. You want to see a healthy economy. You want to see businesses hiring because that means your customers have jobs. So anyways, we have teams that look at these, every day and are kind of monitoring the various indicators. Again, to tie it back to how we use this, right? There's the long view, as I mentioned, where we look at kind of the macro strength of the economy and the country in terms of growth, and large load is actually a conversation around that. Like, what kind of economic growth is that going to promote, and what kind of long-term plans do we want to put in place? But from the day-to-day perspective, there's also pivoting that goes on, and this slide is simply a brief illustration of how you can kind of translate some of the indicators that may be more familiar to folks with some of the specific items that you may hear me give updates on at our quarterly updates here at the board for our regular board meetings. Specifically, non-fuel revenue, right? So revenue that doesn't flow through fuel, wholesale revenue net of fuel. Those are both impacted by weather and impacted by local demand. So to the extent you have a healthy economy, locally, you would expect that your non-fuel revenues are strong. To the extent that the state of Texas has a strong economy, you'd expect that wholesale revenues would be strong. And then, correspondingly below that, you see a few other economic indicators that tie back to our budgets, as I've mentioned. And of course, interest expense. I mean, interest rates ultimately is how it manifests, in terms of costs for CPS Energy. So the intent is not to go, too much in detail on any one of these today. The intent is really just to update the Risk Management Committee in this forum of kind of the work that our teams do behind the scenes and provide that insight. So I will be brief and leave it at that and hand it back to you, Committee Chair.
Sure. Open it up for questions? Dr. Romero? I do. Let me just find my notes.
While you're doing that, Madam Chair, let me just say, anybody wants to talk economics with Corey, you will see him get into geek mode because he really enjoys talking about monetary policy and this topic.
Thank you for the shout out, Rudy.
I kind of go back to, I know it feels like what we're discussing is really light. Some might look and say, well, it's, because in many ways, we've been hearing a lot of this is not new. Even when Dr. Mackey was chair and I was chair, now we have a new chair. But I guess for me, as, having an executive position, I'm always more, how do you pay for it? That's always my question when someone comes and says, I need to hire new resources, or, the cloud is at capacity, we need to upgrade. So I think that eventually we're going to have those hard conversations, and maybe today we will not. I kind of go back to, how do you all pay for it? There's cost recovery. That's one mechanism. There's going to the market because we're in a good position to get favorable terms. And then there's going to our regulator or our owner, the city of San Antonio, which again would be that conversation of rate increase. And so I guess for me, in some respects, I'm kind of tired of hearing what we already know is our headwinds, and more anxious about what that conversation will look like of how do we pay for it. And so there's a part of me that's kind of like, already pull the Band-Aid, and we need to start having those conversations. And maybe I'm just getting ahead of myself, because I think those are the things that keep me up at night. I think that, I think we have a good plan. I think we're ahead of the plans in many ways. I think CPS has made a lot of strategic investments. The tough conversations we've had public input, specifically a Vision 2050, not Vision, but Horizon 2050, and we continue to have dialogue throughout the city of San Antonio and the state and out of the state. So I guess I'm just looking forward to the day of how do we pay for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we will have those conversations, and we've, Rudy has said it before in the past. I mean, our options are to borrow, our options are to raise rates, or our options are to reduce costs. And I think that trifecta of options still continues to be the option. I think as part of the generation plan that Benny just described, the cost laid out for that was, nearly $14 billion nominally, right? So there implied in that was a series of rate increases and an increase in borrowing to meet that, which is part of the conversation. I think, to your point, as we get closer in time and see how the actual numbers manifest itself, then we kind of get into what does it mean today? And so, I'll pause if Rudy, you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just, you're asking the question. Yeah. We've got a plan that we've been executing that I think we have executed ahead of schedule and below cost of where we thought we would be. I want this board to recognize that, we're not like philosophically hard-headed about what's ahead of us in any way, shape, or form. The board has to inform us on where the boundaries are that we're allowed to operate in. We got to figure out, what direction and input we're going to get from council. And if that means we have to go back and revise our plan to meet, the objectives of this organization, which is to provide reliable energy as affordable as we can, then, that's what we'll do. That's what we have to do. What maybe sometimes isn't talked about enough, saying that the community is going to be averse to any rate increases going forward doesn't mean that protects customers from cost. What that means is it's going to show up in different ways, because at the end of the day, if we can't get the rate support, for instance, to go out and buy or build new generation capacity, and we got to go out and buy that on the market, then customers are going to get what they get. And that'll show up in the fuel cost, and we'll do our job, in whatever way we're able. But just saying no to rate increases, that are necessary to complete the work that we've started 3 years ago, doesn't mean customers don't see more cost. And so our job as a leadership team here is to present you all and our city council with the lowest cost options as they're available to us in that moment, including how we're going to cut costs where it makes sense and allow us to continue to do our jobs. And all of that has to be on the table at all times. But we aren't philosophically tied to any outcome. We're trying to just get feedback that we need and go out and make it happen. But again, that's why we talk about the one team mindset. Our team has a role to play. Our customers have a role to play. You all have a role to play. The council has a role to play. And we'll figure out over the next 6 months where those lines change, because they will. And we're going to do the work necessary to figure that out. So, Chair, you're asking the question. Yeah.
I'm very much like, tell me exactly, and then I'll reverse engineer to figure out how to get there, right? But I think in this case, we've had a lot of planning. It's just really, again, the top headwinds, political headwinds, again, market headwinds, appetite, new leadership locally. And so I think for me, I'm just anxious to kind of cross that bridge and figure out how we're going to get the second half of that plan executed in whatever flavor that is. And it doesn't change, no matter what the flavor is, the demand isn't going away. I mean, that's a fact. How you arrive there will maybe vary a little bit, but our challenge is no different than the challenge at a national level. I mean, energy is a national security issue regardless, and so it should be very interesting. So anyways, just real quick, just remind me again, where are we in alignment with the largest utilities in the United States that are municipally owned as far as how much is our average cost?
Our bills, you mean? Yeah. I think we're definitely the lowest in the state of Texas by about $30 from a combined electric and gas bill. We're either the lowest or second lowest in the nation for combined electric and gas. So we're significant. And then
What is the highest off the top, since you're such a guru with financials?
like what city?
Yeah.
It's probably somewhere in California, if anyone knows offhand. It's like $300 odd or more.
So 300 compare to
Oh,
the
yeah, it's
30.
significant. I mean, even in Texas, you're looking at the low 200s, and our average is 170. Oh, San Diego's the highest? Yeah. Great weather, but the bills are high.
Okay. Thank you very much. If we can move on to the next item. Mr. Bill Cost. We're going to be talking about we're on item number 9, AI, utility perspective.
I want to thank Anna Marie and each of you for the opportunity to speak to the board today. My name is Bill Cost, and I am the Energy, Power, and Renewables Advisory Leader for Marsh in the United States. I've lived in Houston since 2007 and have 2 decades of experience spanning engineering, insurance, and risk management. I also maintain a professional designation in enterprise risk management. My professional career has mostly focused on supporting the global energy and infrastructure sectors, including utilities and data centers. Today, I'm presenting on the topics of risks and considerations related to AI, artificial intelligence, from a utilities perspective. I welcome your questions throughout the presentation and have also allotted some time at the end for questions and clarifying comments. You should have a copy of this presentation and my speaking notes for current and future reference. We'll start with one conclusion, and that it is, over the long term, it will not be an option for CPS to avoid AI risks. In other words, you will have to mitigate, manage, retain, and transfer different risks related to artificial intelligence. The current emergence, utilization, evolution, and growth of AI is like the early days of computers and the internet. It's hard to run a successful organization today without computers and the internet. It will be difficult to run a successful organization in the future without AI. A somewhat recent study found that the median time to go from interconnection request to commercial operation in ERCOT is a little over 4 years as of the end of 2023. I suspect that it's probably gotten worse just in the last 18 months for a variety of reasons, and likely takes even longer to achieve commercial operations for new generation. Interconnection studies are absolutely necessary for large loads in generation. You can't simply agree to add large capacity without considering critical balancing or new infrastructure implications. Other relevant studies are important to understand a project's impact on the community and environment, whether it's pollution, noise, environmental take, economic benefits, or job creation. At Marsh, we focus on risk to support projects throughout their life cycle: project development, site selection and design, construction, testing, and commissioning, operations and maintenance, repowering or repurposing, decommissioning or mothballing, and land reclamation. There's a lot to consider, and it all takes time to do this work well. I think you'll agree that 4 years is likely an unreasonably optimistic estimate for how long it takes to get new power generation online in ERCOT. But why is that important? More recently, another study by ERCOT estimated nearly 30 gigawatts of data centers, of which 22.175 gigawatts are, and then crypto mining is 7.5. So combined between data centers and crypto mining, you're looking at 30 gigawatts of data centers and crypto mining load growth just over 4 years from now. Okay, that's why the timing is critical. That means that if we don't already have that 30 gigawatts in process for interconnection and construction, we likely won't meet that projected demand. And then remember, that's only the projected load growth for data centers and crypto miners. There's other growth projected as well. Just for comparison, current projections for adjusted load growth by 2030 for industrial customers is another 7.1 gigawatts, another 7.9 gigawatts for hydrogen production, and 3.1 gigawatts of additional load growth for oil and gas industry electrification. I want to emphasize that these numbers are impressive, yes, and then they're also projections. These 2025 projections for 2030 are substantially larger than the 2030 projections that were done in the previous year. So back in 2024, they also projected what the growth was in 2030, and it's changed considerably just as the one-year revised projections. In fact, the 2024 estimates for adjusted load growth for data centers were only 8.4 gigawatts. This year, the estimate ballooned to 22.2. Who knows what next year's projections for load growth will be in 2030? There are lots of people who want even more data center growth in Texas. Now, when it comes to adding generation to meet new load, utilities have a couple of options. You can design and build your own assets, or you can buy somebody else's projects while accounting for levelized cost of energy, carbon footprint, risk, etc. Also, you should consider what generation options best align with demand. While data centers and crypto miners collectively represent the bulk of demand growth, we're focusing on artificial intelligence because it's the largest component of all projected load growth in ERCOT. That's between 11 and 15.5 gigawatts of new demand for AI in about the next 4.5 years. Because we are focusing more on risks related to data centers and AI, I'll now discuss some information that hopefully you find useful about data centers and artificial intelligence. Our data center and artificial intelligence networks need to be reliable and resilient. If you need to dial 911, you absolutely want that call to go through. If you want somebody to make a commodity trade in real time, you need that trade to go through. If you are remotely monitoring somebody's life support, you cannot afford any interruptions in data connectivity. Some computing needs cannot or should not be interrupted. We need reliable alarms and communication capabilities, each of which currently uses AI or may use AI in the future. Some data centers need or promise 5 nines availability, which equates to roughly 79 seconds of downtime every quarter. This level of availability has huge implications for power supplies, transmission and grid interconnection, as well as cooling, because you need to keep these data centers cool, and often that cooling requires water. And of course, you want redundant connectivity. I'll remind the board that risk, by definition, is uncertainty, and then there are many risks associated with AI, data centers, and digital asset mining. Those that require very high availability have massive financial risk due to outages and service interruptions. Data center developers also want a very fast interconnection and permitting process. Is that feasible if each new data center load is projected to be 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, 500 megawatts, a gigawatt or more per location? Some of these AI and data center customers are seeking behind-the-meter solutions. But what happens if that power supply goes offline and then the asset seeks backup power from the grid? And similar to the dot-com boom, how many of these companies will be around in the next 5 to 10 years? There may also be substantial counterparty risk. I want to focus on a few key risks related to supply and demand volatility. Earlier this year, you may have heard in the news that Western Europe suffered a catastrophic blackout, mostly across the countries of Portugal and Spain. I'm going to summarize the event really briefly. What had happened was that a large generator tripped offline, which led to a loss of synchronism. That's an important thing for the grid. Within seconds, another large generator tripped offline, and that prompted a cascade of renewable energy projects that also tripped offline. Tie lines then tripped off as well as a 1.3 gigawatt nuclear reactor. So keep in mind that these trips are done to protect the integrity of the assets and the grid. Okay, those are safety mechanisms. They need to happen. But in combination, it created and then exacerbated a massive blackout. Soon after the grid went dark, Spain and Portugal began efforts to black start nearly a 40 gigawatt system. 62% of Spanish substations were re-energized within 9.5 hours and all fully restored after 15.5 hours. Full load was restored within 24 hours of the initial event. Now, as of right now, root cause investigations continue, but there are enough publicly available facts today that I can mention key lessons learned and future considerations. Key lessons and risk mitigation considerations include static and dynamic voltage control, protection coordination, monitoring and mitigating oscillations, synchronizing torque, ride-through capabilities, and inertia management. I encourage you to work with your qualified experts to learn more about each of these specific issues. Now, I mention these risks because they exist here in Texas. We can expect future winter storms, polar vortexes, hurricanes, derechos, wildfires, tornadoes, and even extreme temperatures to periodically wreak havoc on generators and the grid. On top of that, we have more variable load coming online. Some large loads will still rapidly ramp up or down within minutes, despite rising prices and decreasing reserves. In 2023, a crypto miner sold $24 million of pre-purchase power and then temporarily shut down its operations in order to temporarily curb demand during an August heat wave. Because of that, they also earned nearly $7 million by participating in the ERCOT Ancillary Services Program. How can we optimize the resources we have and not waste money on idle spare generation capacity? Perhaps it goes without saying, but load is never consistent or constant. Current power systems were designed and built for occasional peak power demand. A steep curve like what you see here suggests high demand variability, with peaks significantly exceeding typical loads, while a flatter curve indicates more consistent usage. We see here in this graph that the share of maximum system peak as a percentage of operating hours for each balancing authority in this graph taken from a report by Duke University. The conclusion? There is room for additional load without adding any generations. In this particular research paper, researchers estimated 10 gigawatts of headroom just within ERCOT if it was allowed up to 0.5% load curtailment, which equates to approximately 177 hours per year. Researchers estimated that the average curtailment duration in ERCOT would be in the range of under an hour to just over 4.5 hours per disruption event. While we can easily spend hours diving deeper, I want to mention this idea for future study or consideration. On the supply side, we expect continued generation volatility. Within a year, we can see the evolution of the duck curve for ERCOT, which shows the growing generation contribution from solar for part of a typical winter day. However, the steeper curve illustrates that we need more generation ramp up to compensate as solar generation wanes. Options include deploying more energy storage and more dispatchable generation. To summarize a few key risks related to artificial intelligence and data centers, we know that there will be continued demand from renewable energy resources. To the extent that Texas remains a renewable energy leader, we will need to contend with the implications of interruptible generation. Some AI and data center entities need extremely high availability, which means that they need uninterruptible power supplies and cooling. The load will fluctuate, and with respect to AI and data centers, those fluctuations can be large and over very short periods of time. It's important to acknowledge market dynamics and consequences. AI and data centers require power and cooling and may put strain on our valuable and critical resources such as generation, the grid itself, and water. As data centers and AI rapidly grow, it's hard to imagine a scenario where everyone's cost will decrease. While today's focus is on external risks, it's important to acknowledge value in a future for CPS that includes the further use of AI. As equipment and operations evolve to be more digital, AI will play an increasing role. Future generations of employees will be increasingly comfortable with smaller and mobile computing capabilities. Imagine the days where most desktop computers and laptops are obsolete. Everyone might have their own mobile device, remote internet and cloud connectivity, and a monitor or virtual reality headset available for convenience. You can utilize AI-enabled enterprise solutions to be more efficient with tasks ranging from billing and payroll to communication and data analytics. You can deploy AI-supported sensors across your power generation fleet and get real-time updates to operating conditions and trends. AI can analyze this data faster and help you both visualize and analyze equipment efficiency and health. In addition to increasing productivity and capability, AI can empower convenience. We're only really getting started with what's possible. I've been told that CPS Energy's established digital transformation program, Evolve, is aimed at capitalizing on these future opportunities and ensuring the responsible implementation of AI and evolving technologies that deliver value to their workforce and customers. Utilities risks will continue to change over time, so what's worked in the past may not assure the same results in the future. We cannot ignore the risks related to aging infrastructure. What was designed and built decades ago will be less resilient to power flux of the future. Not only do we have baseload, intermittent, and dispatchable generation, but we also have other assets and entities that can modulate their demand or even put power back onto the grid. From microgrids to planning 765 kV lines, future infrastructure might be wildly different from what we have today. Power purchase agreement risks remain unique to each negotiated deal, but there remains challenges to addressing force majeure, default, replacement power, environmental attributes, and all at competitive prices and tenor. Some of these risks are insurable, but sometimes a robust contractual risk transfer strategy can deliver substantial value. Whether facing natural disaster or other extreme situations, we should prepare for situations of imbalanced supply and demand. The consequences to interruptible power can be financially and reputationally catastrophic to data centers. It's important to understand their availability needs as part of a more holistic approach to encouraging flexible loads and flexible computing. The numbers associated with peak demand growth may seem scary or daunting, but there is certainly room for efficiency if the right parties are able to commit the right effort and align accordingly. There is tremendous potential to improve utilization of existing resources and flatten generation and demand curves. And we cannot ignore the role that AI will play in everyday life, inside and outside of work. AI introduces novel risks to individuals and organizations, some good and some not so good. This technology revolution will present many opportunities to utilities. Utilities like CPS can invest in and further optimize their generation portfolio. Energy storage technology continues to evolve, and not without its own risks, which creates a new ability to align power supply and demand. AI, data centers, and digital asset miners can develop their projects with flexibility in mind. If these companies can shift their computing across time and geography, They can play a meaningful role in the future with respect to balancing supply and demand. But those companies aren't utilities, so how can we optimize this opportunity for them without putting undue risk on them or even discourage investment in Texas? As computing evolves from hyperscalers all the way down to the edge, from massive gigawatt-scale data centers to mini computers on your phone, power demand will modulate across these scales and put unique strains on existing and future infrastructure. How we operate and maintain a resilient and reliable grid is paramount for sustainable growth and success. Not only can companies improve efficiency with AI, but they can change how they hire, train, and manage a techno-savvy workforce. These opportunities are not without their own challenges. Success is difficult. Texas recently created the Texas Energy Fund for the sole purpose of encouraging new conventional generation assets. We've already lost nearly half of the proposed projects for a variety of reasons, such as supply chain issues, tariffs, labor, and equipment costs, and some project sponsors backed out due to uncertain revenue streams. The most recent legislative session here in Austin committed even more money to boost project development, but it's not easy. Any cogen project that is successfully built in Texas may still be 5 to 7 years away. New gas turbines average about 5 years until delivery, and costs have increased about 50% in less than a year, and there's no certainty about any manufacturing capacity growth to meet increased demand. Utilities and data center developers alike will continue to face challenges, and they can at least face some of these challenges together. We know that any grid infrastructure upgrades will come at a cost and take time. We can work together to make sure those efforts are optimized. There remains a lot of risk or uncertainty about global supply chains and tariffs, which makes it very challenging to dedicate so much time and money to develop new projects. Utilities and their customers will face the challenge of paying these costs now or potentially higher costs in the future. And of course, we are all subject to public and government opinion and perception. NIMBYism and YIMBYism, not in my backyard or yes in my backyard if you're not familiar with those acronyms, they're both very real. But reality is also full of regulation, laws, physics, and thermodynamics. Some of these are quite inflexible, so it's likely best to proceed with flexibility in mind. Technology will continue to evolve, and the general public will continue increasing its use of data, technology, and artificial intelligence. Perhaps even my next speech could be written or edited by AI. I want to thank you all again for the board and the audience for your time and attention. I welcome your questions now with the remaining time we have.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to trustees. Dr. Romero? I do have questions, but I think some of them have been already kind of answered. So I think on slide 57, which is the topic of avoiding AI risk. I mean, I kind of go back to the same question of, in light of national momentum around AI and evolving regulatory landscape, how is CPS, again, how we position ourselves to lead in shaping reliability standards while maintaining alignment with the broader market expectations? So, I mean, I think we've talked about it high level, but I think those are the things, again, that keep me up in mind. But I guess I'll ask you that question. How do you think we're doing?
Well, from an outsider's perspective, because I live in Houston, I think you're doing well. I mean, the important thing is that you are encouraging dialogue to be aware of what's going on, the challenges that all of your stakeholders are facing, and this includes your customers and potential partners. It's not easy, and personally, I am grateful that you even allowed us to speak from our perspective. But it's something that, and I think the board mentioned that you're going to continue these dialogues well into the future, dive deeper, because while high-level conversations are time efficient, in order to make decisions and actually come up with action items, you need to dive deep and you need to invest in resources, which is a lot of time, not just hard dollar costs. But it seems like you're the right company that's willing to make those commitments.
Thank you. And questions more specifically for Benny, but it goes back to, again, how do we avoid, again, the AI risk, right? The AI risk, right? So again, are we shaping the reliability standards? And do you believe today we're maintaining those? Are they aligned with the broader market expectation?
So I believe we are. We're doing the research necessary. We've got systems in place, and we're doing what I believe is an effective job of integrating O&M support along with our teams to help us get better at doing just that. But there's tremendous opportunity out there for AI. We've engaged a company that has developed this for other OEM providers, and we're talking with them now also as a bolt-on to some systems we already use.
Okay. And I mentioned it earlier. And I think you've developed this process, at least it was the other gentleman. So if I understand correctly, on our public website today, you can go visit and you can, again, we've outlined the process. So I go back to the question of speculatory growth versus long-term and making sure that our infrastructure can support both within ERCOT's and updated coordinated framework. I kind of go back to the same thing again. Can we, with what we're hearing today, can we clearly distinguish?
The answer to that question is, we're only as reliable here as ERCOT is reliable across the state. We can have a reserve margin of 50%, and if ERCOT's underwater, then, we're underwater. So, our work has to be informed by what, their forecasts are saying. We have to challenge ourselves to acquire or build capacity at the rate that we think gives us the best chance to maintain the reliability our customers expect. That's kind of why we've never really had a formal, hey, our reserve margin should be 25, 30%. Generally, we believe, and we've operated under the condition that our reserve margin should be more than ERCOT's. But simply stating, we're in it together, and there's just no way around, the issues happening at the state level impacting us.
Maybe this kind of supports, this is more about AI data mining and demand res. So you're basically telling me, at least what I'm hearing, we proactively are considering measures consistent with ERCOT guidance, right? And then to ensure the large load interconnection requests for reliability integrated into our planning process. It kind of goes back to it's all tied together. And what I'm hearing, that despite our planning, at the end of the day, they can go in a different direction. And I guess the other question would be more on the power backup. Are we accommodating the power demands? And then how can we best ensure system reliability, resiliency, and protect our customers from potential pricing or reliability impacts? And I can repeat that if I need to, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess from a resiliency perspective, as you know, we've been working with SAWS to help them build and commercialize their backup generation for their water facilities. We're also, I think, in talks with another local company to do some things. And this falls more into the business development side, but we're working very closely with them. And our market operations team is working to effectively integrate that generation into our fleet. And as Rudy has explained to you before, life cycle generation. We're bringing that in, and we'll provide queasy services to support that.
Yeah, I mean, the shortest answer possible is we have to have a generation plan that allows us to stay ahead of the forecasted growth. The minute we hit pause, the minute, we get, we want to take a more conservative approach, we're going to get behind quickly. And so that would be, my advice to the board as we think about what our generation strategy looks like going forward is, we want to control our own destiny to the extent possible. And to do that is going to require the investments we've talked about in every regard. The distributed investments that our customers are making, we got to work with them, like Benny mentioned on the SAW side, we got to work with them to figure that out. If solar and batteries is the only resource available to us over the next 5 years that allows us to stay ahead of it, then that has to be, our solution. Gas has to continue to be our solution. Nuclear, especially small modular nuclear, has to get into the mix at some point in time. and we got to figure out a way to do all of this as affordable, in an affordable manner, or our customers, won't support it. So, we're operating in 4 dimensions right now where the ground is moving under our feet at the same time, but we can't let that, test our resolve. We have to be bold and courageous in the decisions that we're making because our community, demands it. There's no, and we have to do the job of explaining why all these things are necessary.
And I have one last question, I think goes back to slide 10, page 65, I believe, but for you it says March, slide 10. Which of these events are most relatable or applicable to our region and statewide planning environment, and how are we which of these right here that you output are more likely to take place in our region, and should we consider for our planning?
Are you asking the question from the perspective of an individual generation asset or just CPS in general?
As an individual.
I would say what we see, obviously, renewable power intermittency, that's 100% of the time. It's part of what renewable energy is. If the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, they're not generating power. So we do see a lot of projects that are then coupling those with energy storage in some way, shape, or form, or aligning with variable demand. So that way, the customer is simply consuming whatever is generated, and they have variable demand in that regard.
Okay, and I guess we're already, we've heard it over and over. We have the plans in action, right, Benny? Okay, Benny, you're a smooth talker. Let's see. But anyways, thank you very much. I don't have any more questions. Any other questions from the trustees before we conclude? I believe we're going to be taken into executive session, Ms. Ramirez?
We have no items for executive
Okay.
session.
And I just want to conclude just again with the following remarks. Let me make sure. Thank you again for this focused discussion. I think we've been discussing these items for quite some time. I think, again, now the question is how do we fund everything? What we've seen today reinforces the importance of staying alert to changes while remaining grounded in the principles that have guided this utility for decades. As we consider the guidance coming from federal agencies, ERCOT, and the PUC, and as we build new relationships with local leadership and our charge is clear, we must continue to deliver value while managing risk with integrity and transparency. I encourage each of us to follow through on today's discussion with action, whether it's further clarifying risk, adjusting timelines, or continuing stakeholder outreach. I appreciate your thoughtful engagement. Thank you again to the staff for preparing this and your ongoing leadership to CPS mission and our shared future. I will ask, and I did speak to the current chair, Dr. Romero, if we could share the notes, the memo that went to, who was it? Let me look for my notes, I'm sorry. I sent out a memo on May 5th, 2025. If we can go ahead and send the memo to all trustees so they're aware of all the risk items that were identified, and that way trustees can be rest assured that financials are top of mind. And then I'm just going to ask if we can, some follow-up items that I would like to see for the next meeting is if we could request a summary of the top 5 new high-risk or SWAN risks and their mitigation plan. And then I believe you already answered this. The custom-facing load process was already launched. Is that correct? That was already launched? That's officially. And then I heard a request also, and I heard it was going to be in June, that we're going to revisit the Vision 2027 plan. Is that correct?
No, well, we'll do that throughout the remainder of the year.
Throughout the remainder of the year, and the chair will, I guess, inform us when that will take place on the board agendas. I really do think it's important that we have a follow-up conversations on that. And then on the ERP risk program, again, I'm a little bit more, if we can schedule some kind of alignment or review with Horizon 2050 and confirm oversight with Gartner's team would be good. And then again, I would just again ask for any,
Can you go back over there, Madam Chair? I didn't understand.
I'm saying, on the ERP risk program, if we can schedule a lineman review with Horizon 2050 and confirm that the Gartner team is part of that, because we just heard that they just came on board and we don't have a lot of real-time data, and I think it's important that we have a refresh with that.
Does that have to happen here, or can that happen in Technology and Resiliency Committee?
To me, and I actually had posed that question during that meeting, I think it can take place there, but I think eventually it needs to be brought either in a memo or some update to this. We need to start connecting them more. They're not separate things.
Well, it's a timing issue.
No, I
They just kinda
understand.
got
From a
going,
timing
so,
perspective, I think they can take place to the committee, and eventually they have to come in some formality to the Risk Oversight Committee. And then the last thing I think is, again, and I think you mentioned that this will take place by, I can't think of her name right now because I'm not feeling good. Miss Garcia, is that correct? I would like to propose a quarterly check-in, I guess, or track alignment on the CPS Energy strategy when it comes to revolving around ERCOT, the PUC, and the federal and local guidance. I know, again, we have a new mayor and new council individuals, so they need to probably be brought up to speed with all the existing stuff. And then I don't know, again, I think Mr. Steen's concern was how are we going to align with federal mandates coming down the pipeline as well, and then state. And I know we're going to get an update.
Yeah, we'll have a conversation about that. We can update you however you want.
I look to the chairwoman to decide how we get updated. My only concern is that we do somehow, through committees or through some formality, that we do get an update on, because it's going to be volatile, it's going to be changing. I do think we need some real-time update on how that's all going to work, because it'll affect our decision-making. And those are about the only follow-up items, and I'll follow up a little bit more formal, just because I have my notes. I think that's it.
I move to adjourn.
Second.